We're going to see 50% of white-collar jobs just disappearing in the next 1 to 5 years.
That's the economist definition of productivity, right? More work, fewer people.
In the future, we might need more generalists versus specialists.
The human plus AI beats either one together.
Human plus AI, if now it's a powerful combination, then in the future, the role of the human will be diminishing more and more because there will be less skill.
And AI is very good at learning about the world as it is, and much less good at learning about the world as it is becoming. There was no world where you could ever make an iPhone with paper drawing.
Dr. Mindell, on a daily basis, we hear terrifying news here and there. For example, the CEO of Anthropic recently mentioned that we're going to see 50% of white-collar jobs just disappearing in the next 1 to 5 years, which is something that is terrifying for all of us, especially mid-career professionals or early career professionals as well. I want to know, what is your realistic assessment of the situation, and is it as gloomy as this prediction is?
Well, when you hear predictions like that, they have a fair amount of self-interest from a CEO who has a company whose business is kind of convincing people that they can do jobs through their algorithm rather than with people. So there's always a grain of salt to be taken with those kind of predictions from those kinds of folks. Not that they're wrong, they're also very close to the technology and they see things that are maybe harder for us to see who are not quite on those front lines. But you always want to ask, who's predicting this and what do they have to gain from that prediction? And, we're in a period of change and uncertainty. There's no doubt about that. We've been through these phases before, and almost the definition of technology is doing more work with fewer people or fewer hours or less labor input. That's the economist definition of productivity, right? More work, fewer people. And so, and that's generally a good thing. We've been through that road for a long time, and we don't really all want to be working in the fields anymore like we were one day. And at the same time, it's very disruptive if you happen to be one of those people whose work or career is changed. So labor and work and skill have always been pretty dynamic. They've always been responding to technology. And, if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, some of my colleagues have done something like 60% of the jobs they list didn't even exist in 1940. Web developer, tattoo artist, dog walker, massage therapist. And what's crucial is that as jobs are changing and some of them are automated away, that we keep pushing forward and creating those new jobs and new kinds of jobs and new kinds of roles and new kinds of skills.
As you said, like, this has happened before, like during the Industrial Revolution, we've had the same, right? Anxiety, social unrest, people losing jobs, uncertainty. And it seems like that's exactly where we are now. But for me, from where I'm sitting, it seems like this state of change is going to persist for a while. We're not going to see suddenly things just, okay, we have integrated AI in the systems, we're done. Like, this is great. Seems like the pace of change has changed so much that I don't see in the horizon when we're going to have a settled labor market when we know what we're doing.
I think that's probably right, but again, it's like you can say we've been through this before, and at the same time, this has been happening for 200 years, more or less continuously, and 250 years. And so the jobs that our parents had are not the jobs that we have, and that's been true for not to say there aren't some traditional jobs out there, but even if your parents are doctors and you're a doctor, your work is quite different from their work, what it was even 30 years ago, much less 50 years ago. And so I think it maybe is helpful to think about, again, skill and labor and jobs, which are all slightly different, as being in this constant conversation with technological and economic change. And maybe when we're growing up, it feels like, oh, I can go be a industrial manager and that'll be stable and I'll work there my whole career. There have been periods where that's been the case, but it's more the exception than the rule.
Hmm. Yeah, when I remember maybe 5 years ago, everyone wanted to be a coder, someone, an engineer, a software engineer. And
Mhm.
nowadays, this is just not the case anymore.
Yeah, right. And coding, ironically, is one of the first things to be automated by AI. And
Yeah.
at the same time, somebody's got to decide what to build, and they've got to
Hmm.
do the basic architecture there. And one should always be thinking about, am I doing something that's a sort of rote algorithm, or I'm doing something that requires the things that people are still good at: human relationships, communication, strategy, synthesis. A lot of jobs don't involve those things. Those are
Yeah.
people who should be thinking about it. It's hard to give advice, but one piece of advice is to gravitate toward those places where those attributes of human behavior are going to be valuable.
I think in your work, you also talk about the importance of collaboration, interdisciplinary collaboration. So, how, let's say, engineers would be working with public policy specialists and then whatever, fintech specialists. And from what I'm implying from what you're saying is in the future we might need more generalists versus specialists. Is that a right? Is am I assuming correctly that generalists are going to play a more important role in the future?
I mean, I think people who can make connections between things are always valuable.
Hmm.
Um, I think there are specialists who do that amazingly well, right? So you can be very highly specialized in something, and that
Hmm.
gives you special insight into how it's connected to other things. So I'm not quite sure I'd quite put it that way because, I mean, I work on a campus here at MIT where there's a lot of people who are super hardcore specialists. And they
Hmm.
are the people who have to be the architects and the synthesizers and the people who lay out the future roadmaps and so on. And even though they're highly specialized, maybe because they're highly specialized, they know more about this topic than anyone does, and are in
Hmm.
the only position to evaluate whether an AI is doing a good job at whatever they're doing.
So it's not necessarily about being a generalist, a specialist. It's more about having the skill, the ability to collaborate, interdisciplinary.
I think that's right. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of value to specializing
Hmm.
in its own way.
I think another thing that you talk about is, which I find interesting, is redefinition of roles versus elimination of roles. And
Mhm.
so when we talk about AI, for example, if we have execution, now it's going to be supervision versus execution. Can you elaborate a little bit on what the redefinition would mean in this new age? And does that mean also that jobs will be cut based on that?
So, one way to think of it, this is just a sort of terminology thing, is jobs tend to be uh, collections of tasks. And 5 years ago, people were saying, oh, radiologist, an AI can recognize tumors, or in an X-ray may be
Mm-hmm.
better or as good as a radiologist, and all the radiologists are going to go away. Well, reading images is only one part of a radiologist's job. And they have a lot of other things they do all day, including communicating with patients and putting the imagery in the context of whatever the disease is. Or I think people have worked on this. I don't think there are any fewer radiologists, but you know what? Radiologists using AI are really great at that job. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
they're more productive, and maybe there will be fewer if they can do more. Um, but uh, one of the things that's often found is the human plus AI beats either one together. And that's also long been true. So we want
Mm-hmm.
better, more productive radiologists. There aren't enough doctors in general to go around. So if the doctors we have can do more, that's a good thing. And so often what you see, I mean, people say, oh, all these jobs are susceptible to automation, but you want to look a little more closely and understand how much of the job are those pieces. And I tend to find in my historical work, the job roles are very often for the professional ones, like you know, um, are very often the constant things. So the title of the radiologist is going to stay the same because doctors are powerful. They control a lot of things,
Mm-hmm.
even if the job changes quite a lot in terms of what they do all day. And I think a lot about airline pilots, right, who fly
Hmm.
very highly automated machines. But part of their job is to stand there in the doorway and greet everybody when you go on and have a nice uniform with, buttons and iron shirts and make people feel confident that they're being looked after. And
Hmm.
that's a harder role for a machine to play.
Hmm.
And there are other aspects of the work they do that way, even if they spend less of their time, flying in the sense of like hands on the wheel kind of thing.
Hmm. I tend to agree with the statement that obviously human plus AI is more effective, more productive. However, I have a question, which kind of is ironic. So, doesn't if a human, a specialist, is using AI more and more, aren't we going to see erosion of skill? And at some point in the future, we're going to see where human plus AI, if now it's a powerful combination, then in the future, the role of the human will be diminishing more and more because there will be less skilled.
Yeah, I mean that is a phenomenon called de-skilling that we worry about. We worry about
Mhm.
airline pilots not knowing how to fly by hand when they need
Mhm.
to, and there's ways that we can, guard against that. We certainly worry about people losing sight of what the fundamentals of reading the X-rays are or whatever the task is. And
Mhm.
again, we've learned a lot from aviation about how to keep people informed of those things. And the AIs are still limited. They're at least the ones we have today are still based on historical data. They're not generally good at dealing with new things. They're very good at saying, the last 200 X-rays we saw, this was the outcome, so this one is likely to be that outcome. But when something comes up that is outside of their purview, it's much more difficult. You see that with how challenging it's been to deploy driverless cars in any real human environment, and it's still only in very limited environments because weird stuff happens that's not in the database. People are pretty good at dealing with that. You can collect every weird thing that's ever happened and put it in the database, but you're still going to miss things, including
Mhm.
how people react to driverless cars. So the world out there is always changing. And
Yeah.
AI is very good at learning about the world as it is, and
Mhm.
much less good at learning about the world as it is becoming.
Yeah. So it's based on historical data, which is valuable to understand. I was thinking about ownership. And when we talk about human AI collaboration, humans are different from AI because we have ownership of the work that we're doing, decision making skills. But as AI is getting better and better, we can see that at some point, potentially, it also might start making decisions and have decision making skills. And so the role of the human, that ownership component will be reducing. So, for example, if I'm writing a paper now, if before it was 100% my paper, my work, and I would pride myself on it. Now, if I'm writing a paper, I'm using AI, and there's less. It's my sense of ownership is diminishing somehow.
Mhm.
Would you agree with that? And what do you think this is going to look like in the future moving forward?
If you talk about writing, which is something I do a lot of,
Mm.
right? Again, AI is very good and it's getting better, but it's very good at the sort of like most, I mean, it's a prediction machine, right? So it's very
Mhm.
good at predicting writing. It's very good at predictable writing, right? Which a lot of the world is full of. And if I need to write a brochure quickly, that's probably what I want, right?
Mhm.
Um, but like music or like other things, the novelty and the originality comes from the unexpected and the things that are different and new. And, I'm teaching a class this semester, and, you know, um, I'm not assigning students to write papers anymore. I am assigning them to write a collective paper. But I told them, I'm assuming you guys can learn anything you want using ChatGPT, right?
Mhm.
Every student in our school has a subscription to the pro version of it, and you know, like that's just a given. But I also know what it has to say on the topics that I'm an expert on, and I know the limitations there. And my job is to teach you the things that are not ever going to be in those databases, right? So
Mhm.
they're very good about telling you what is known, and they're much less good about telling you what's new.
Mhm. Interesting. So you just you let your students use AI as much as they want. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really want them to. You can tell when it's been written, right, by
Hmm.
an AI, partly because it is so predictable, right?
Hmm.
In the final project in this class, we're trying to add things that only we know, or that only these students, given their experience and the other students around them and their proximity on the campus and their relationship to research, that only they are going to know. And that's a useful question to ask. What is it that I really know that's special that the rest of the world doesn't know?
Yeah. What about the meaning of work? I feel like it's not just how we do it and what we do. It's also how we feel about work that's changing.
Mhm.
What do you think that's going to look like in the next 5, 10 years? How is that how is AI redefining the meaning of work for us?
That's a great question. And of course, making a living is an important part of work, but only part of it.
Yeah.
And and it gives people social identity. It gives people something to do all day. It gives people a sense of purpose. And maybe some of those aspects will be highlighted. Again, not like we didn't go through in the pandemic years changes in work that were quite profound.
Yeah.
And suddenly we learned we could switch the way that we work very quickly and then switch it back
Hmm.
somewhat. It hasn't switched back all the way yet, but
Yeah.
it's certainly very much more hybrid than it was before. And so work can change, work does change. The kind of work that we're used to, where we all go to the same place at the same time every day and kind of interact on a very predefined schedule. And that itself is a kind of industrial product, very much based on clock and very much based on physical presence and very much based on notions like a factory or an office. These are social inventions that aren't that old, really, in the scale of human times. I mean,
Mhm.
office work is really a product of the late 19th century. Um, and if you look at, file cabinets and desks and 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper and number two pencils, those are all things that were invented between 1880 and 1910, including
Mhm.
business schools. Why should we think that that's the standard normal way to work and that there aren't creative, new, different, interesting ways to work that people have come up with? And many people are. There are a lot of people who have
Yeah.
permanent remote work. It has pluses and minuses both for the individual and for the organization, but it works in certain settings. I don't know what the next stages are, but I do think there's room for creativity and innovation in what it means to work and what your work means to you, and how people do things that they find a mix of what's effective in the world and what supports their economic life.
I want to know, how does AI change your work specifically? Has it made it easier for you? Has it made it more difficult? What what is it that changed in your work, and how do you approach work differently from when AI wasn't available?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, uh, um, on the one hand, I just think a lot about work and technology, so it's certainly an overwhelming amount of change just
Yeah.
to manage, even since we wrote a book on the future of work in
Mhm.
2022. And part of my job is to just I like to be a user of advanced technology, just to stay current and understand it. So I do spend time both learning how these systems work and also, how they might be useful to me, even though I have I don't process insurance claims. I don't manage a large organization. There's a lot of things I don't do, and there's a few things I do do. It's very effective as a search tool. It's somewhat effective as a kind of give me a summary of this literature. And if it has references, that's very good. I don't need the summary to be perfect. I just need it to get me started on moving down a path. I published a book last January, which was written before most of this came out. So I didn't use it when I was writing that book hardly at all. Now I'm starting another book, and think a lot about. I don't think I'll use it for writing at all, but it's pretty good for what are the major, you know, what are the major books on the history of semiconductors. I
Mhm.
know most of that, but it's good to get a quick answer to that. And so,
Mhm.
in that sense, it's like a supercharged web browser. Web browsers have become less useful in that way because
Yeah.
there's so much out there. And at the same time, um, if I'm not saying something that's different from what ChatGPT is saying, I probably shouldn't be doing the thing I'm doing. Um, and I don't have too much worry about that because
Mhm.
they're not going to give you a novel or original interpretation of things that people think they know. And
Mhm.
that's ultimately kind of what my job is.
Mhm.
Um, Changes teaching a little bit. We're all still experimenting with that.
Yeah.
But the students have access to it. They're going to use it, and they're going to have access to it for their whole career. So you're a
Mhm.
fool if you think you can outlaw it.
Mhm.
Um, Now, that said, they should learn how to write, and there are certain places that it's appropriate for them. But I'm teaching a class that involves coding now, and it's been true for a long time that even just simple Google search was a super effective tool for writing code. If you need to look up a function definition or have a problem with an error, you can just type it into Google and it'll click you there. And so the coding tools are effective there. I do think for the kind of work that I do, it makes me a more powerful worker.
Mhm.
And I don't really have a strict productivity measure, but it does make me more productive in those ways. And it's still early days. We're all still experimenting. And those tools are changing very quickly. So
Yeah, they are.
I barely have the time to keep up with what's new.
Another topic that I want to pivot to slightly is we hear again a lot of contradicting opinions. Some CEOs of tech companies highlighting the importance of learning maths and physics. This is the most important thing you need to learn. And then
Yeah.
there's another camp saying that, oh, no, actually, humanities is what you need to learn. That's the future. And so
Yeah.
we're bombarded by this contradicting information. And so people right now are just confused as to what is it that we need to pay
Yeah.
attention to. What is your stance on that?
Well, I've spent my whole career doing both those things. I'm half an
Mm.
engineer and half an historian. So obviously,
Bilingual.
Um, I think that's valuable. I
Mhm.
think in general, people should study two things,
Mhm.
and two things that are, different enough that they develop your brain in a different way. I also spend a lot of time thinking about what's fundamental, like what's not going to change despite all these changes coming. Math and physics are fundamental. They're not going to change. I
Mhm.
mean, they evolved, but um, and so are core concepts in the humanities and the history of how we got here, and the history of human subjectivity and what it means to be human and how that's shaped by the time and place that you're in and what aspects of it are fundamental. So I think that um, you know, if you go get a degree in web design, that's a precarious knowledge base because it's a very local in time. And as we've
Mhm.
seen, it's radically changing. But when you talk about, I mean, what people should study in school, finding something that's fundamental or multiple things that are fundamental is important. And then, skill is by definition something you acquire. Nobody's born with skill by definition. And you have to be good at acquiring skills, and you have
Mhm.
to learn how to learn because you're going to be doing it your whole career.
Yeah, I think now more so than ever, we're going to have to be acquiring skills at a faster rate because I think it's been somewhere I read this like the lifespan of a skill is 2.5 years now.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
crazy how fast things change and how fast we need to learn.
And the tools for learning are also much better than they used to be.
Mhm.
I've been teaching myself to play guitar using
Mm.
almost entirely YouTube for the last 2 years. And it's amazing what you can do and what you can access. And partly I did that just it's always good for a teacher to be a student. You learn a lot by being a student and keeps you
Mhm.
humble as a teacher. You remember how hard it is for your students. And I watch my kids learn math with Khan Academy or YouTube or other things, And even for the math that I learned, I can go to YouTube and I can see illustrations of it that are so much clearer than anything I ever saw on a blackboard.
Hmm.
And you have to kind of be living in those worlds as you keep up, because other people are. Learning is hard, and especially it's hard
Hmm.
for people in the middle of their career. We don't know very much about how mature
Yeah.
adults learn. We know a lot more about how kids and young people learn.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is fundamentals are important, math, physics, and, and some humanities as well. So it's you can't really choose one or the other when it comes to, let's say, your basic education, right? Maybe school. But what about higher education? How is that changing? How is the role of higher education redefining? Considering that we also hear a lot of people saying that universities are dead. We no longer need them. Is what do you think about that? I know you're a
Yeah.
professor, but what's your sense?
Well, I mean, I do think a lot about that because, I mean, I teach a class that I've taught for 20 years,
Mm,
and we're about to put it online as a MOOC, right? When I first started teaching it in 2005, YouTube was barely even a thing, and there
mhm,
was almost nothing on it. Then we ourselves, it's the class is about the Apollo lunar landing program. So we brought in a lot of astronauts who had walked on the moon, and we videotaped them. So we ourselves created an enormous database of video of the lectures and the guests. That's all now on YouTube and accessible. Just
mhm,
that changes the way we teach in the classroom. So in a way, and we're not the only ones. There's a lot of other people who have been creating content and putting it online that the students have access to. So it does change the way. And there again, it forces you to ask, what are we doing here in this classroom that we can't do any other way? You should always be asking that question anyway. And the students show up, and there's something about the energy of the human interaction, both between the professor and the students and each other, that's still
yeah,
there. And I do see that it's still there. And there are other ways to get it as well. But, we have students from all over the world clamoring to come here. At the same time, again, the things you have access to online are just insane compared to what they were even 20 years ago. But people could always go to libraries and educate it themselves.
yep,
And some people did. And
mhm,
those are special people, and they're very educated, and they don't need school probably. But most people find that just like the pilot's job is to guide you onto the plane and make you feel comfortable, the teacher's job is not to communicate the facts to you, but is to sort of hold your hand as you walk into a new world. And some
yeah.
of that I do think is fundamental.
Yeah, I would even argue it's more important now than ever because just because we everything is online, everything is digital. So this human interaction, the community, the ability to interact with a peer who is like you, is going through similar situations as you are, who is in the same
Mhm.
period of life. I think that is becoming more important than ever. So yeah, I would agree that the role of higher education is changing, but its importance is not diminished, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean it has other social roles too, of course, just
Mhm.
exposing, mostly this has always been true. The students learn the important stuff from each other. Um, they develop cohorts and relationships and connections that are valuable in the work that they do, and friends and spouses and partners. I mean, at least the students that I see don't question that. They're very committed to that. Now, I only see the students who choose to come here and spend years of their life on campus. Um, and there are plenty of other ways that people can get those interactions. And school is not for everybody, and it never has been. In fact, school is an industrial production line
Mhm.
designed to crank out students like factories. That's where blackboards come from, right? The blackboard and the chalk are like the 19th century versions of YouTube.
Mhm.
And that's never been the best way for everyone to learn. And it's never
Mhm.
been the best way for me to learn. I was not a good classroom learner, and I still prefer teaching outside a classroom.
I know it's hard to delve down to one skill or one set of skills that is the most important in this age, but if you were to guide professionals nowadays in helping them understand what is it that they can pay attention to now so that they can sort of future proof themselves in the coming years in the
Yeah.
future of work, what would that be?
Well, again, I think I still think writing is very important and being able to express yourself through writing. It's only
Mhm.
become more important with email and so on. Um, and the writing is the thinking. If you can't write it clearly, you probably don't think it clearly. So I
Mhm.
constantly see people who can produce bullets on PowerPoint, but actually there's no coherent ideas in there. The bullets are not ideas, right? And but the same is true of basic computer skills, basic math skills. One has to feel comfortable in an information technology environment. And I think the same is true of basic skills in the material world, even if it's just as a hobby, doing something that puts your hands on, uh, whether it's a musical instrument or a drill press or a, ceramic pottery, that engagement with the material world and some level of confidence in it um, is also important. And some people, of course, emphasize some of these more than others. It's become repeated so often, but you want your kid to go get a job, tell them to become an electrician, and those are very well paid jobs in very high demand these days. And there's actually lower unemployment than there is among college graduates. And a lot of people actually would find that work satisfying who instead have been sent to college. And college
Mhm.
is not for everybody. And a white collar office job is not for everybody. And I mean, one of the major points of my last book was to encourage young people to get out and be in physical contact with the world because that's really important. And we've lost a lot of that.
And with that, thank you so much. If you're ready to make that 1 degree shift towards massive transformation, then hit that subscribe button and join the MetaSelf community because sometimes one idea is all that takes for a breakthrough.